All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to trace this really wild cultural thread that somehow connects a high stakes Cold War spy trial, a revolutionary swimsuit, and believe it or not, one of the most famous cartoon characters on the planet. Yeah, it's a story you won't see coming.
I know, it sounds like the setup to a very, very strange joke, doesn't it? But the answer tells us something pretty deep about how we, as a society, deal with fear. And more importantly, how that fear can ripple through culture in the most unexpected ways you can imagine. The one thing that ties it all together? The atom bomb. So to really get this, we've got to rewind the clock, go back to the years right after World War II. The world is trying to piece itself back together, but it's doing it under this brand new, absolutely terrifying shadow. All of a sudden, the power to wipe a city off the map wasn't held by just one country anymore. As soon as the Soviet Union got their own bomb, this simmering anxiety just started to seep into everything. And this wasn't like a fear of some army on a distant shore. This was a constant, low-level hum of dread. A fear of total annihilation that you couldn't see, but you knew it was there. And what happens when a whole society gets gripped by that kind of fear? Well, it starts looking for someone to blame. The threat felt so huge, so existential, that the hunt for enemies turned inward. It lit this fire of paranoia and suspicion that just spread all across America. And this is how that fear got, well, official. HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee, basically became the government's tool for this internal witch hunt. You had these public hearings, artists getting blacklisted. They were just stoking the public's fear of communist spies, making this invisible threat feel very, very real. And absolutely no case made that fear more real than the trial of Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. I mean, think about it. They were accused of being spies who handed over atomic secrets to the Soviets. The outcome was the most extreme thing possible. They were tried, they were convicted, and they were executed. For so many people, this was the ultimate proof. The enemy wasn't just out there anymore. They could be living right next door. Okay, so the big takeaway here is that this atomic anxiety was just everywhere. And that brings us to a huge pivot in our story. Because this fear, it didn't just stay locked up in courtrooms and congressional hearings. It found a new and honestly a very strange ground zero. Bikini Atoll. It just sounds like a tropical paradise, right? And for a while, it was. But in the 40s and 50s, this little chain of islands in the Pacific became one of the most famous and infamous places on the entire planet. Why? It was the main stage for American nuclear weapons testing. And this is where you can see the truly bizarre path that culture can take. So check this out. First, the US sets off a whole series of massive atomic bombs at Bikini Atoll. Soon after, a French designer rolls out this super daring two-piece swimsuit. He calls it the Bikini, claiming its cultural impact would be as explosive as the bomb tests. Okay, wild, right? But then, decades later, a kid's cartoon decides to set its story in a town called Bikini Bottom, which is fictionally located right underneath the real-life atoll. And the characters? Well, a very popular theory is that they're all mutants created by the leftover radiation. That's a straight line from a nuclear test site to one of the biggest cartoons ever. But this whole idea of mutation, of these unseen radioactive threats, that wasn't just some funny little footnote in a cartoon's origin story. Oh no, it became a huge theme in storytelling. It actually gave birth to a whole new generation of monsters. You know, this was how a whole generation processed its anxiety. See, when a fear is invisible and overwhelming, like radiation, giving it a physical form, a giant, tangible monster you can see, is actually a pretty powerful way to cope. It lets you take all that dread and put it into something else, something you can look in the eye. And boy, did these atomic monsters become superstars of the silver screen. I mean, just take two of the most famous movie monsters of all time. Godzilla's origin is directly, explicitly tied to being awakened by underwater nuclear testing, just like the tests at Bikini Atoll, and his biggest enemy, King Ghidorah, awakened by underground nuclear tests. The storytellers were literally taking the specific anxieties of the time and baking them right into the DNA of their creations. Which brings us right back to where we started, from the deadly serious Rosenberg trial to the terrifying city-smashing destruction of Godzilla. This atomic anxiety worked its way into every single corner of our culture. It all leads to maybe the most surreal endpoint of all, the idea that even a goofy, lovable sea sponge who lives in a pineapple under the sea is a distant, mutated echo of the Cold War.
So the next time you're watching an old monster movie or, yeah, even an episode of SpongeBob, you can kind of see the faint ghost of a world that was terrified of the atom. And it leaves us with one last thought. If their monsters were born from the fear of nuclear fallout and enemies hiding in plain sight, what are our anxieties shaping? What monsters and what stories are we creating today?